It's not an event unless Marjorie is here.
That is actually true.
Yeah.
Probably the person who is in most attendance of all time of ever being in attendance.
Marge hates us now.
So I'm in the fortunate position of being able to talk to this cast of rogues here for the remaining portion of the evening, and I'm so excited about it because I've never really had the opportunity to really drill some of our own authors. I've always been in the position to just be, yes, of course, yes, yes, yeah, we'll do that too. Absolutely, you can have that. Yes, yes, yes is always my answer. Well, I think the first place to start is actually to start with the cinematographer. First off, how about a round of applause for Sean Perrun? What an exceptional work he put together, and on a shoestring budget, and I mean shoestring.
What do you mean? I had a crew of 10 people.
If by a crew of 10 people, Sean means 10 of himself, then yes, that's exactly what he had. Sean doesn't know this, but I do, and that we actually went through 3 different cinematographers that we talked about this project with before we talked to Sean. So it's interesting to me that Sean actually, and it is true, Sean did reach out and send an email and said, I'd love to do something like this, what do you think? And it was on my radar because we had already talked to 3 other people who I just didn't feel were a fit. And I had not seen any of Sean's work. But what I did see was Sean, and I did get an instinctual feeling, which I think in the arts and in publishing especially, you do have instinctual feelings. I think they call that acquisitions and editorial selections. But so I was fortunate enough to just sit down and have all of these different things come out of Sean, which was 5 different episodes, a cinematic finished product, and then of course we asked him to make teasers and short teasers. So Sean really went to work. So I think the first thing is the round of applause. Sean is amazing, and the second thing is I'd love to kick things off with Sean and really sort of say, okay, the publisher, the client, Matt comes to you and drops this bomb on you of like, this is the project. Well, what do you do? Where do you start?
That's a good question. Obviously, start with asking you a bunch of questions, like what exactly are you looking for? But Matt was really great to work with. He was just like, you can really take this thing and sort of run with it. And just, I kind of told him that if we just ask these writers questions about why they like doing what they do, their passion will come through, and then I'll just string it together in a narrative way that sort of makes sense. And it sounds easy, but it's not. And then, after that, it was, Matt was really great at putting together like pre-screen interviews. So we did Zoom interviews and stuff. Because I want to know who these people are before we go to camera, because that sort of helps me. It informs me on what to really talk to them about, right? And also what to shoot too for additional footage. So I asked them, what are your hobbies? It's kind of like a first date. It's like, what do you like to do? Who are you really? And then after that, it was just going to camera, and the rest kind of falls together there. But really, like I guess the most important part, I think, was those pre-screen interviews, like just really getting to know what sort of makes them tick as writers and artists, and sort of formulating my plan based on that.
And on the flip side, to the authors, what was it like meeting with Sean for those first pre-screening interviews? What were your expectations? What do you think was going to happen? Because just so you guys know, this is the first time they've seen this is tonight. So they haven't seen this up until this point. So they all went into this blind as well.
But Sean let me know that we could have seen it earlier, just saying. It was available, we could have watched it, so thanks for that.
There was no way that I was telling anybody where to find it. So what was that like, George? What was it like meeting with Sean?
Well, I considered all of the visual things that I might be doing on screen to represent my life. I realized just how little activity my life actually consists of. And well, let's see, I can sit in this chair or stand by the bookcase or put a DVD on.
Thank God you didn't do that.
I was admiring Cece Dennison's writing socks.
Yes, yeah.
What were they?
They were colorful, they were daring, they were bold.
I didn't know you were taking photographs of cinematography.
The one where you were on the couch,
Oh,
writing.
all right. See, I came in late. I just saw your last 4 minutes, so I don't know what I.
Yeah, so Doug still hasn't seen his episode. But the only thing that Doug knows right now is that Ariel knows about his socks. How she knows that, he
You're
has
like,
no
wait a
idea.
We were allowed access to each other's workspaces.
That's right. Also, I guess that's yeah, go ahead, George.
To go a little bit further, I was apprehensive. I think it's so easy to, two things you don't want to have happen is to be ponderously pontificating about something you care about, or B, to be too timidly self-conscious and, self-deprecating in a false, unconvincing, and rather unappetizing way.
So you want to be really self-deprecating.
Self-deprecation is an art, and you don't want to do it clumsily.
Fair enough. You're achieving it right now. Don't worry, George. You're doing very well. So let me put it then to probably the most quiet person on the stage. I'm going to let you guess who that might be, and also probably somebody who has the most years in the field of writing. You see how quick Doug threw that microphone over to Dennis? Yes, Dennis, I am talking about you. Dennis is our province's quiet sentinel. He's that's how I see him. Dennis is an exceptional poet that flies under the radar, and the weight and the disparity of his words have mesmerized so many people for so many years, and often they don't really know how he does it. And I'd like to know how he does it. Dennis, how do you do it? Just bring it close to your mouth.
Your metaphor makes it sound like I'm a bomber. A radar.
Well, maybe sometimes words can be little bombs.
Well, I was struck listening to the interviews with everyone, and struck by how very similar almost everybody felt about what they're doing, about the problems and the rewards. And that's right. I think it was you. I think it was you who said you gotta hang in there. Me? Wasn't that what you said in your
Doug has no idea. This is his eternal punishment for showing up late.
I'm not sure what I said was right.
It was good. It was very good. But yeah, mostly you work steadily. I remember years ago, I heard Bob Crocho occasionally would talk about strategies. He almost never did. But what he did say often is you got to have a plan. And so he had series of manuscripts he did, and he had pretty much a notion what it was going to be for 5 or 6 years. And those series of long poems came one on the heels, one after the other. So mostly you work. You know, but you do it out of passion. I was really excited to hear everybody say it's just gratifying, it's challenging, but God, it's rewarding. And so you do it because it's a reward to yourself as much as anything.
So Dennis has also been called a poet's trickster. And do you see how he managed to wiggle his way out of the actual question? He answered it with another poet's answer. And I don't think we're going to let Dennis off that easily. I would love to know what drives Dennis. What is your magic bullet?
I don't have one. But you like what you're doing. It's something that you
So
want
it's passion.
to do. Yeah, and it's gratifying, challenging, and sometimes it's painful, frustrating. But you do it because this matters as much as anything to you. I think it's what everybody's saying.
Yes?
Right? That's what everybody's saying.
So Doug, is it painful? Is it challenging?
No. No, it's challenging. Is this on? It's challenging, but it's not painful.
Okay, and what are some of the biggest challenges? Besides financial, which we heard every single one of you say.
Yeah.
And by the way, there is nothing but truth to that.
Yeah, well, financial. The other challenges, well, just getting it done, getting as much work done as you want in the amount of time you have. Like, I like to set myself deadlines, and I rarely make them. Everything I write is longer than I ever planned it to be, way longer, except the thing I wrote for you. No,
Yes.
that was longer too. That was going to be a short story that turned into a novella.
That's right. You did extend it, yeah.
Well, sorry.
No.
I can't help it. I wish
We
I
were
could
thrilled.
write shorter. Yeah, I think those are. But whatever challenge it is, it's not unpleasant. It's a lot of writing is just endless problem solving. So you're just solving problem after problem after problem, and you have control over it the way you don't in your life. So.
That's an interesting.
And by the way, you said that in your piece.
Did I? Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. I'm
Just letting you know you said that already.
Alright, sorry.
Spoiler alert,
See, don't
Doug,
ask
you
me
did
questions
that.
until I've seen what on earth I said. When did they film this? Was it last fall?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. September?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, can I just leap in?
Yeah, of course.
I actually couldn't remember what I'd said in the interviews. I remember the day, but of course I watched all of you before me, and I was like, oh my God, they're so good. What terrible, inane things did I say? And
So you did see it.
No, but I was sitting in the audience, and I was last, and I was
Yeah.
like, oh my God, they're so good, and so insightful, and so eloquent and smart. And
I saw your last 4 minutes and they're very good. Very insightful.
I'm really good at a 4-minute length. Although apparently mine is 8 minutes long. So
Did Ariel get more than the rest of us?
She might have. You
I'm
have to
calling
look.
my agent.
You have to look. You have to look.
Second longest, I think.
second longest. We're not comparing. There's no comparisons here. But mine is second longest.
So, Ariel makes a good point, though, and I think this is something that I've noticed about most of the writers that we work with, in fact all of them, is that they always seem to think the worst. They always seem to feel like it's never done or it's not done right. Do you think that's because of how exposed you are, George?
Well, on Facebook,
You're not supposed to expose yourself on Facebook.
but it's a weird thing. I mean, I've been doing these things at least one a day since 2008, and early on when I was trying to figure out what a status update might be or what it might do or whether something resembling a genre might eventually emerge. I mean, I don't know, the problem initially was all about distance. How close do I want to be as writer, speaker? And I think fairly early on, I decided to exclude the word I, not absolutely, but most of the time, and just start fresh with a name and a word, a phrase, a situation. But as I said about the collaboration with Guy, I think it's so much easier to expose yourself
Right.
when it's not quite you. I mean, but
There's a thin
but
veil
just
of-
moving closer to that point of, well, I think others have mentioned this, felt resistance. I mean, there's something, it's not always discomfort, but there's something that you're perhaps a little afraid to go to directly, and you're thinking of coming at it maybe from an off angle, or maybe not say it at all. But sometimes the presence of a name that isn't yours at the center, it allows you to spill the beans in a much more satisfyingly full way, and not to spare yourself. I love what Philip Roth has to say about resistance. There has to be something in the material that resists you. And we can often imagine that what we're working with is resisting us, but very often it's in fact rather comfortable and familiar. I mean, I like to reach a point, even in the short status update, where well, now I'm home free, I know what I'm going to do, but then say there has to be a reversal. There has to be a turn in the opposite direction. There has to be a contradiction. That the thing is neat, and the very neatness makes it somehow not coincide with my sense of truthfulness. I don't know if the various things that just spewed forth make any sense to you, but it has. I think I'm sort of talking about exposure here.
Right. And so, keeping with that theme of exposure, do the other three writers here feel that they also have to expose themselves in some way when they're doing the writing? Blinds closed and Doug?
Oh, God. No. Well, I don't know. I don't know it. It's very good. Very good thing you said. I don't know how it applies to me. I'm trying to think. Duh.
So
well, no, I mean, I'm writing in sort of mostly in a kind of a commercial genre, so I'm not dragging stuff out of myself that much, really.
Right.
Just in the more the pop things I've done.
But where's the resistance in your work?
Maybe not exposing myself.
And that's fair. So you'd be the antithesis to George, where George is finding ways to, allow his a sense of his true self to emerge. You're keeping it back.
Yes. Wow, this is already what I know.
And you use a pen name, so you are.
Exactly.
You actually do that, you're pen name.
Yes.
Well,
Except we all know you now.
And why the pen name?
Oh, not that question again.
Yeah, come on. Reveal yourself.
All right,
We're all
reveal.
friends here.
Why did I pick a pen name? Well,
No,
because
why Cece Dennison?
Why
I know why you.
Why
I know
specifically
Yeah.
Cece Dennison? Oh, because when the editor I had said if I was picking a pseudonym, pick from the top 3 letters of the alphabet, because you're likely to be my level.
Oh.
If I did Whiteway, I'd be.
So this was a
It's
purely commercial
purely
choice.
commercial choice.
And all the publishers love him.
Well, no, she liked the word blessing, which I hated, so I picked Dennison, which is a synonym for blessing.
Fair enough.
And
Not much
Cece?
use. Cece means nothing. Canadian club.
Coco Chanel.
Coco Chanel. Yeah, I could do the double secret.
Yeah.
Carbon copy.
That's
Yeah,
it.
there's lots of-
Ariel, if you were going to have a pseudonym, what would it be?
When I was I wanted to be a writer from childhood, and I at one point was trying to scheme up my pen name, and my 2 middle names are the names that my grandmothers were given when they came to Canada, so not their original names, but the modified versions of their names. And so I at one point thought I would be J.D. Gordon.
J.D. Gordon.
Because I had this idea that way people wouldn't know what gender I was, and they could encounter the work without any preconceptions.
I know the idea well.
Yeah, and then I realized that my own name, Ariel is actually kind of a cool name, and B, it's without gender, right? Like it's a male name in Jewish and Hispanic culture, and it's from The Tempest, and that was wasn't clear what sex the fairy in the Tempest was. I had teachers point that out to me in junior high in front of the whole class. It was awesome. And so, but what's nice about my own name is that every time I put a book out, the Jewish press phones me and wants to do an interview, and I have to explain to them that I'm not Jewish. I mean, I should just say yes. Sure, I'll do an interview, but I always have to disappoint them. Yes. So J.D. Gordon was as far as I got, and then working in publishing, and people would have pseudonyms, and then you'd have the check all ready for something, and they'd come up, they'd be like, oh no, the check has to go to this name, and I'm like, oh, now I have to write a different check, and so I just thought it was irritating. I decided not to do it, that it wasn't worth the trouble. But I mean, you have had parallel careers as an editor and as a writer, and I can see why you would want to keep them separate.
There was nonfiction for me before, so having a pseudonym for fiction just seemed somehow logical, and it's a bit of a mystery.
Yeah.
Crime novel tradition. Oh, I should be saying into this.
Yes. Are you going to is it your tombstone going to have both?
I hadn't thought about that.
It's something to think about for sure.
It's a good one.
Otherwise known as?
Yeah, right, sure.
Or which one is he?
Yeah.
Dennis, what's your pen name? Did you ever have a pen name that you imagined?
No pen names, but something I'd like to say about vulnerability. I quote a good old friend of mine, a very good writer, David Arneson, who would say, you can't confess even if you tried. Right? There are no naked expressions. Everything we do is mediated, even when it's very personal and poignant and crucial to ourselves. You write a poem, you're not expressing yourself, you're writing a poem, which might involve your own expression. But I remember I could say, for example, you want to express yourself, you can always yell. But if you want to play the piano, you got to learn how to play piano, you got to practice it. So I think even when you write things that are very personal, and I do that a lot, and they're very meaningful to me, I still don't think that this is me nakedly there. This is not whatever this biological figure might be, but it's somebody writing a poem into a world with its conventions and expectations and various forms of reception and refusal. So I don't think that when you write you're particularly vulnerable. I mean the writing doesn't generate genre writing, but I think it does in all the writing. This ain't you. As that you personally, it's you the writer, and which makes you a public figure.
Right.
Now you guys can argue with me.
George?
I would say what makes me most vulnerable, permanently vulnerable, is the ever-present possibility that I've just written a bad sentence. You know, I mean, and not
Yeah.
able to see what's wrong with it. I mean, sometimes you know immediately and can toss it out. I mean, but so often, I don't know, you think you have something, and 20 minutes later it just seems to be preening, artificial, and just too much. I mean, too much hand waving, or too much of a kind of barren simplicity. I mean, at the other end of it. I mean, but in any event, no, they're just, or they're trying to, it's like actors that are admired because their acting is so visible. I mean, I prefer acting where I can never catch the actor doing anything that reminds me of acting, and that I forget about it entirely. Now that doesn't mean that I don't like literary flourishes. I do. I mean, I love rich language, but somehow it seems to me that it's possible for writing to be extremely rich and exhilarating without that kind of wrong archness, fancifulness, a kind of wallpaper poetry that often gets into prose. That I'm sure you know what I'm
Dennis, have you done a lot of wallpaper poetry?
No, I have no readers.
But no, I mean that. I wonder how other people feel about the perennial uncertainty in relation to
for sure.
the sentence that is just trotted out. Like, again, returning to Roth, I was a little bit surprised, though you said something similar in your interview. Philip Roth says he wrote customarily 100 pages before he found a usable sentence. 100, and he said, well, do you keep those pages? Do you rework them? He said, I never want to see them again. I mean, imagine that much, I mean, the ratio of refusal to acceptance there, and especially for someone who has been at it for decades, and certainly has a very sure, accomplished sense of what his strengths have been in the past, at least. Anyway, did you?
No. Ariel, anything to add on
I just started edits on my next book with Ad Bay Press, and there's always that moment before you open up the document, right, from the editor, and to see how they see it, and to see if you've been found out on some level, and which of your favorite poems they hate. You know?
that?
And
So
then
is it an exciting or crushing?
Well, or are you defiant?
I think it's a mixture. I think if you're not defiant at some point, like I don't think you can accept someone else's vision for your own work, so you have to both try and see how they see it, to see the logic that they're working from, to see their outsider's view of your work that you've lived inside for so long, and then you also have to know when to fight for something that maybe they don't see, or that maybe is the thing that you do, the thing that makes it your work, right? And it makes it your aesthetic. But you know, it's a wonderful and vulnerable moment, but that's what you hope for in editing.
Yes.
You actually want someone to sharpen you like a pencil, to sharpen your work like a pencil, and to
Yes.
scrape away what doesn't need to be there. But you know, it's hard. I mean, hard and wonderful. And I have always wanted to have, you know, you see movies about writers, and there's always that transformative edit, that editor that becomes their best friend, that knows them better, that helps them achieve what it is that they're meant to achieve as writers. You know?
And then they learn to resent them.
Yes, well, there's that, but I found this in independent publishing, you don't get that really. The edits that I had for my first 3 books were very sort of fairly light edits, and mostly it just said, this all works.
That's it.
And I wanted my work to be banged like a drum. I wanted to see what if someone else tested it, how it stood up, and where the flaws were, and how we could fix them together, right? And I hadn't really gotten that to any great extent. I've been waiting. And so, this manuscript is a collaboration between myself and a poet from Saskatchewan, Brenda Schmidt. And we asked another Brenda, a poet named Bren Simmers, to be our editor. And I have loved her work since I met her at Sage Hill in 2003. And I've edited a couple of her books. And so it was really nice to ask her to be involved. But she's asking some tough questions. She looks like a very nice person, very soft-spoken.
Well,
it's rough.
I have some comments on, well, I guess probably the first, I have a couple things. One for each one of the 3 fellows here, because Ariel's touched on some really good things. I guess we'll start with George first, because George had mentioned earlier that he's been writing these mini narratives since 2008. Well, we're 2022, and he said he's done one every day, so I'm pleased to let you know that we did not put every single one of them in the book. But that's in large part to the editor on George's book, who, as it turns out, is his son, Thomas.
Oh yeah,
Toles.
my son! Why didn't I mention him?
Yeah, George. So Thomas had the magnificent and overwhelming task of weeding through all of these.
It was, yes, there were 2 flowers, 1,000 weeds. But no, yes, Thomas, I had no idea when the prospect of a book finally came closer to reality of how to go about this. I mean, there were, again, as I said, about 1,750 updates with Cliff art responses until he stopped doing them around 2013. And one thing I was sure of, I did not want it to be over-organized. I didn't want there to be theme headings, and I wanted to replicate something of the serendipity of the Facebook presentation, where I try to get as much collision and variety from day to day as possible, so you really don't know what sort of thing, what sort of tone, whether it's going to be funny or trying to be sad or a mixture. I mean, you're always hopefully just at least a little bit off balance and surprised. At least that's the plan, the dear hope. Well, so I just didn't know how to trust my own judgment, how to begin to organize a small selection, and Thomas took it on, went through the entire assemblage, got it down to 200, then down to 100, and then began to create a nice, understated continuity. I mean, a continuity that isn't immediately apparent. I mean, no theme headings or topics, but the way in which you go from this to this had a kind of near identifiable logic to it, but you couldn't quite say.
Right.
And so, yes, I mean, the fact that there is a structure and that perhaps there's a certain amount of sense and satisfaction is entirely owing to Thomas. I did not veto any of his selections or make demands. I trusted him. He knows me better than I know myself.
I got that feeling as well. just so you know. Having worked with him in the background, it was amazing to me to notice how much he seemed to be familiar with the work, to the extent. Well, no, Thomas, his son, right?
And the author.
Yeah, and the author. Well, that's the thing, right? Like, is that he did know you.
Thomas has allowed me to direct him in plays 7 times. Can you imagine voluntarily putting yourself further under the authority of your parents and having to take their, not just their guidance, but their insistence seriously? Well, make of that what you will.
Yeah, not for me. So we'll move on to a man who's worn both hats, which is Cece Dennison, Doug Whiteway, in that he is both author and editor and has worked in both capacities for us. So that's true. You have been an editor for us, and you have written a book with us. So what's it like wearing both hats? I guess the better question is, what's it like being an editor and being edited by somebody else on your own work?
Being edited on my own work,
Do you have more compassion? Do you have more?
Well, yes, yeah, you do. Since I've been edited, I kind of know what it's like, so I don't, run a red pencil through all the text and say, this is crap in the corner.
Right.
Even if I think it. but you have to, I stand in for the reader and try to ask sensible questions and make changes that a discerning reader would.
What a lovely concept, to stand in for the reader.
Well, that's what editors are, really.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to do it from that perspective. I'm just a discerning reader when I read it. I try to think what the reader needs to know, or doesn't know, or shouldn't know, or questions of taste, all kinds of things that come up.
Right.
So I guess that works the other way too. It's having a good editor is a wonderful experience. It's really helpful.
Have you ever had a bad one?
No, I haven't. I've had very good editors in every case.
Yeah, that's been our experience too. Is that the rapport? I think that's one of the best words, is a rapport between author and editor, because there is such an important connection there. Which brings me to Dennis. When we were working on Dennis's first book with us, The Muse Sings, the editor was Barb Schott, and I didn't know this about Dennis, but he could be a little obstinate. And Barb would call, I don't know, once or twice a week, distraught, calling me and said, "Oh, Matt, he's done it again. I've given him back the poems, and he's rewritten them a whole different way and given me a whole new set of poems. What am I supposed to do with this?" And then I remember talking to Dennis, and whether or not he remembers this is a whole different thing, but Dennis would respond and say, "A poem is never done." Do you still feel that way, Dennis?
Yeah, I think that's, for me, a good sense of what it is as a writer and as an editor. I've done a lot of editing too, a lot. I like doing it. But my sense of what an editor should do is to be in some kind of rapport, but not person to person so much as text to text. And what I want is an editor who knows what I'm doing. I'm sure everybody feels that way. It's not easy to find somebody who knows what you're doing. It may sound really arrogant, but if you do odd things, and I'm an editor who says, "I want these poems," that's of limited use to you. It's of use, but it's of limited use. So you're hoping for, as a writer, you get an editor who says, I got an idea where you might be going or what you want to do or think you're doing, and I can respond in those ways. So when I edit, I try to do that too. I'm not giving you direction, I'm giving you suggestions. This may be helpful to you, I may not. Think about it. And I also say, much as Ariel has said, my own words, but I think they're close to what you said. When you're a writer, you want to be both humble and proud, right? Stubborn, if you will. Well, I mean this. Editors don't write authors' texts. They read them and give them advice.
Mm-hmm.
I really strongly believe that. An author should stick to their guns, but they should also be open to and welcoming advice and criticism. Think about this seriously. So, I mean, that's my sense both as an author and as a reader.
I wholeheartedly agree, and I jest with regards to Barb. If she was here tonight, she would probably feel terribly exposed after I've given away the secret of her editorial relationship with Dennis. There were many times when she was extremely pleased with the end result. And I think, Dennis, you were as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So keeping with this, I want to ask Sean, because editing from a cinematic perspective is a completely different thing. And now you have these 4 subjects that you had to, weirdos, that you had to, as Ariel said, that you had to edit. And they're 4 different people, they're 4 individuals. What was that like?
It's maybe not as different as you might think. It's kind of, I saw similarities throughout everything that they were saying about their life, their lives as writers, and you know, for a film, you could edit it forever and never ever release it. Like there's probably still things I would change if I could go back and, you know, re-edit this, but and it's the same thing with I think any piece of art. You just have to maybe eventually just cut yourself off and be like, this has to be done or else I'll never move on to another thing. But yeah, I mean, for each different episode, I just tried to let each individual, you know, writer, artist come through as best as I could. And I think that goes for, you know, the music selection and the color grading and really everything. For example, Ariel was, when we went to Assiniboine Forest, it was a sort of a gloomy fall day, right? It was super overcast, and you were wearing, I think, brown and like muted tones all throughout, and I was like, this really, really fits. So with the color grade, I made everything sort of like orange and brown, just to sort of match that, and like those color grades were present throughout your entire episode, and so little things like that I just tried to you know, bring each individual's personality through in as many ways as I possibly could.
That's fantastic. Was there any real difficult moments?
Yes.
Let's hear them.
Okay, so everybody said so many like really intelligent things that I wanted to put everything in there, but you know, you're limited by, you know, how long someone will actually sit and watch something for, right?
And the client's time constraints.
And that, and how much, well, and also how much time I want to put into it as well, right?
Right.
Like I said, I could probably edit it till the end of my career, but that's not serving anybody.
It would be serving me.
Sorry, I lost my train of thought. What was your original?
These difficult moments like we're talking about right now. What was one of the, like,
right.
That was one of the really difficult moments, but
yeah.
In addition to that?
Yeah, no, in addition to that, it was just trying to get all the really intelligent, poignant things that everyone said in there and still keeping some sort of narrative arc going throughout it, right? Like, I think George gave me the most trouble. Our interview raw was about an hour and a half, right? And I cut that down to 13.
That's all I gave you?
I think I eventually had to cut it off and be like, we have to film something, George. but yeah, so cutting that down to 13 minutes, right? And especially when I asked a question like, why is art important? And someone like George is just so prepared for that. Like after it fades down, the very next thing he says is, so you can tell I'm prepared for that question, right? And so yeah, I think he answered that question for 6 minutes, You know what I mean? And,
Right.
But like, how do you compress that down to something that makes sense and that's palatable, but also still giving the respect to the answer? Huge challenge. Huge
Well,
challenge.
that's the beauty of your work, though, is compressing that loaded question down, right? And
Well, that's the beauty of interviewing people like this, is that I can ask those loaded questions and they give me good answers.
Yeah.
Sometimes I ask that question to people and they're like, what do you mean? Or like,
Right.
how am I supposed to answer that? Because it's a tough question, right?
it is, yeah. So at this time, I want to take a moment